We are about to get started if that's okay with you, unless my clock is a little ahead of time. I see someone else has joined us, so welcome, welcome. I see people trickling in. Please post in the chat where you're coming in from so I can get a good feel of all of my attendees today. And then we're going to get started. I'm excited to have you all here today. So I already know I have a fellow Floridian here. So let's see. Okay. So if you are able to see my screen, welcome. It is the top of the hour, and we want to make sure we start on time, so we maximize the time. Thank you, the Techqueria team, for coming in. We want to make sure that I have enough time for any questions. Please feel free to pop them. I have the chat open. Feel free to pop any questions, comments as we go through the presentation. I love interactivity, so it's not a wait till the end to ask questions type of session at all. Today we're going to be focusing on onboarding harmony, right? What is the DIMB key to having that success and welcoming your employees and really making us welcome in connecting with everybody. I'm Cora Anthony, and so this is one of my passion topics. I absolutely am obsessed with DIMB and how to make people feel like they belong in the workplace. So I hope you enjoy the session, and let's get it started. So, like I said, I am Coralise Anthony. I am island born, half Dominican, half Puerto Rican, super proud to be Latina. Um, and then now I'm a Florida resident. I'm near the Fort Lauderdale area. And throughout my career, I've dedicated myself to really encompassing what is being diverse, inclusive, authentic, and I bring that to my job every single day. I am DIMB certified, and I'm also an ERG, an Employee Resource Group co-chair. But my greatest pride and joy is that I get the pleasure to lead a global onboarding team. And so I have a beautiful team that has presence in India. We have presence in Uruguay, Canada, the US. We're all over the world. And so a lot of what we're going to talk today kind of stems from that. We get the opportunity to welcome new hires, welcome new people into the company, and really make the distinction based on where they're at and what works best for them. So, if that's okay with you guys, we're going to get going really quickly. So we're going to focus on four main areas today. And if you see me looking to the side, I have a monitor as well. So that's why we want to focus on the importance of DIMB in onboarding specifically, right? A lot of companies think DIMB comes after. How do we make people feel permanently that they're welcomed? But it's that beginning, like it's that romance, kind of like that love story at the very, very start that really makes a difference and helps people stay with your company. And then we're going to look at some practices and strategies to implement. Um, we're going to look at two case studies from the worldwide, on how they've effectively applied this. And then throughout, it's interactive Q&A. Welcome, Norman. I love Chicago. I was just there. So lovely to have you here. If anybody else wants to let me know where they're from, I love to know where everybody's joining in from. So let's get to the good stuff, right? The importance of DIMB and onboarding. So why does it actually matter? Representation is important. So if you close your eyes and you imagine yourself, you're excited, you just applied for a job, you went through the horrible, long, drawn out interview process that we all kind of dread at some point, and then nobody looks like you, nobody speaks like you, and you don't feel like you can be your authentic self. You go from this kind of like excitement stage to then really withering down to, oh my God, what can I say? What can I say? I go through this all the time. As you can see here, I move my hands. I'm very lively. I'm always up and going, upbeat. And then if I were to go into that same space where nobody speaks that way and everybody just behaves differently and I don't feel like I'm welcome to be myself, that would hinder my ability to even think, is this the right place for me? Right? So when we implement DIMB from the very beginning and we welcome our employees in a way that's authentic to them, we can enhance employee engagement and satisfaction. They get more in tune with the company and they really think about what else can I bring besides my skill sets to this place, right? Instead of just focusing on, I'm going to do my 9 to 5 and that's it really becomes an ingrained part of them. Then it helps them foster innovation and creativity because then you're not limited and you start thinking in new and creative ways. And it also improves that retention and productivity. If you feel that you can be authentically yourself, you're going to want to do more. And that's just like an inherent thing that happens to us. So to be able to apply DIMB to the onboarding processes, we need to understand what is DIMB. And so when we think of diversity, it's that process of recognizing and valuing differences. And the idea is that you want to make sure that people are not um, feeling like what makes them different is what makes them separate, right? What makes you different is what makes us want to have you here. It's that thought process, it's those differences of opinions that we really want. And then when we think about equity, the same thing. We want to make sure that there's fair treatment and opportunities for everybody. We want to think of our biases and say, when certain descriptions walk into the room, we already are predisposed to think, are they in line for promotions or are they the right fit for this team versus just getting to know them? When we think about inclusion, we want to think about creating an environment where everyone feels really welcomed and valued. And so we'll go through some strategies on how to do that. And when we think about belonging, how do we make people feel genuinely accepted? The other day, I was mindlessly scrolling on the social media world, and I saw something that really stood out to me as a DIMB leader, but also as an onboarding leader as well, where someone says, we were welcomed, like we were invited into onboarding has this speciality from we're inviting you and we actually want you here. We want your thoughts. We want your opinions. We want your different way of executing on projects because it matters and because we are in a diverse world and we want to align to that. So keeping those 4 pillars like front of mind. How can I be more equitable? How can I be more inclusive? How can I make people feel like they belong more? And how can I embrace diversity? We like to think we embrace it, but how am I actually actioning that? Um, is the first step to enacting change for success. So, what are some of the common onboarding challenges that we face? It's lack of representation, and we started with this. I know I face this, so if you have faced this, please feel free to pop it in the chat. This is a safe space. Um, I've worked at companies where nobody looked like me, nobody spoke like me, nobody understood my my um, kind of inside jokes at times, and it really it took a damper on my experience as I was onboarding into a new team. Like I just mentioned as well, some unconscious biases. When we look at people that look differently than us, we might think that their skill sets may not be up to par. And this is the real kicker: inconsistent onboarding experiences. When we think about the onboarding, we either do it at the fully bare minimum, everybody gets the same thing, corporate orientation, security trainings, and things like that. But what we're not doing is really taking into consideration what are the needs in certain areas, right? So think about that lack of representation and thinking about, do we have a diverse onboarding team that's prepared to welcome people? Am I continuously educating myself on unconscious biases so that I can mitigate that when I'm welcoming someone into my team or into my company? And am I diversifying experiences based on the needs of certain locations? I'll pause there before we go into our case studies. Any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, anything at all? Oh, okay. So we'll keep it going. So when we think about some companies and we want to see what has already been done that has been successful, right? One of those examples is Techsphere Inc., right? And they really spend a good amount of time transforming their onboarding with DEIB. They focus mostly on early hires, meaning people just graduating from college and coming in into the workforce. And so, how do we change their perspectives and make them feel welcomed? So, their initial challenge um, when they started this process was that they needed to foster that sense of belonging and ensure that all of them felt valued from day one. And to do that, they put a committee together to really think through what could be done, what are our possibilities, and they came up with a couple of solutions. First, they hired or brought in into that work stream diverse onboarding people. They brought people that looked and spoke different languages, that had different perspectives, so that they could give that difference in the discussions as they were building out their onboarding program. And then they made sure that all of their materials were also user friendly, and that they were adaptable because you also hire people that may have some sort of disability. So, how are we anticipating what their needs are going to be? They built out a really good mentorship program where from day one, the mentees had a mentor on their team that had a similar background. So there was a lot of thought into who we're pairing you with so that you will have from day one someone that you have affinity with. And then they made not just the new hires, but all employees go through a cultural competency training to make them be aware of what are some of the nuances and the differences that they needed to take into consideration as new hires came into the group. And last but not least, none of this would matter if we don't get feedback. So they put in feedback mechanisms that gathered insights from the new hires perspective. So that way, there were questions around the mentorship program, there were questions about the materials, so that 360 feedback loop could come back and let them know is what we're doing effective, and if it's not, where do we need to change? And so when I first started leading this global program, this was one of the case studies that I was like, what can I bring from this to the work that I do, and how can I think about it to really change the experiences of the people that I touch every single day? And so, what their outcome was, they had a whole new streamlined process where in that feedback loop, the new hires shared that they felt supported and it led to increased productivity as well. Daniel says, interesting to see how there is implementations of UX comes. Exactly, yeah. You have to think from the user experience side of things, not just I lead onboarding and that's what I do. And we have to also think about accessibility and how we integrate that for everybody. Another case study that we found that was super useful is focused all around empathy. So instead of focusing on that inclusion point of view, they focus about how can we empathetic to people's experiences and set the tone from the very, very beginning. So when new hires came in, right, the challenge that they were facing was that they had a very structured, old school, traditional onboarding process that didn't take into account our emotional and cultural aspects. And so, how does that happen when you're coming in? For example, me, very vibrant Latina, born and raised in a Latin American country, now coming into an American company. How do I merge the two where we behave and have completely different expectations as culturally, right? And so, what this company did, they created an empathy experience where they put workshops, facilitated workshops, and open discussion groups where people felt safe to share what are the differences that I'm experiencing here versus somewhere else, and how I'm not enabled or empowered to show up authentically in the workplace. And then everyone had homework and they went back and did self-reflection exercises. They were encouraged to build emotional connections with each other. So as people started to share, they were encouraged to take notes and find commonalities, because oftentimes we feel like we're in this completely alone, but we're not. And other people may have the same experience or a similar experience, and you can start building off of each other. And so the last, and I think the most important part, was about ongoing support. So, how do we build this relationship to be long term, not just at the beginning 30, 60, 90 days of your new hire experience, but as you go through your onboarding? Do these people become your mentors, right? Your sponsors as you grow in your skill sets and in your craft. And so this pilot experience called the empathy experience led to significant improvement, not just in their productivity and the retention, but in the overall company's DIMB efforts. And so they felt a lot more understood, the employees. And then that's what translates into higher engagement. And so it's important to understand that when it comes to onboarding, it's not always when did they start and how productive, like when did we get our quote unquote money's worth. It's really understanding from the moment someone starts, what makes them buy into the work that we're doing, so that then it'll make them stay longer with us. And that's where you get your return on investment. When people feel heard, welcome, understood, like they truly belong, they're not going to look for other options. And that doesn't happen just with the manager, that doesn't happen with the team. That happens from the very, very beginning when someone starts their journey with you. So these are two case studies that um, I thoroughly enjoyed studying as I was building out my team and as I was building out our experiences to to improve our own processes as well. So then what can you guys do? And I will put in the chat, if I'm able to, the PDF of this presentation. So feel free to have it as well. What can you do as a next step if this is the field that you're in? And even if it's not, how you show up for your team members at work, right? And new hires that are coming into your team. Make sure that you have diverse hiring panels. If you are a people leader and you're in the process of hiring, at some point you might have team members interview that person. Make sure that you have diverse perspectives and lines of thoughts so that you're providing those candidates the best experience possible. And once people are hired, make sure that you have given training to the team members that are going to be in charge of their onboarding so that they can be aware of their biases and they can be aware of how they show up as well. I also recommend creating personalized onboarding plans and understanding. So, and I'll use the names that I see in the chat. So, if I'm bringing in Luis and I'm bringing in Daniel at the same time, but I know that Luis has a different set of skills and experiences, I want to make sure that he feels like that is recognized as well. And so that we're creating an onboarding that's tailored to his needs and where he's at in his career versus Daniel and where he's at in his career as well. And part of that is creating very intentional mentorship programs so that it's not just any mentor, but it's a mentor based on what you need at that time. And then feedback, feedback, feedback. I am a data lover, as I would say. Make sure that you have those feedback loops and you're asking, is this working? Is this not working? How can I change it? Because the only constant in life is change. And so you cannot improve and meet our diverse workforce needs unless you are integrating those feedback loops. Now, what are some key metrics that can bring this all home? Because I talk heavily about feedback, talk about your employee satisfaction scores. If you track employee satisfaction scores at week one, they're going to more than likely be anywhere between 95 and 100%. I got a new job. I'm excited. Everybody's nice, right? And I applied for this job, so I've been wanting it. So I'm happy to be here. But then it doesn't end there. How do we check in on them at 30 days? How do we check in on our new hires at 60 days? How do we check on them at 90 days? And even past that, onboarding really doesn't end at 90 days. So, how can we gauge and track the trends of what was having them super excited at 30 days versus what made them lose a little bit of interest at 60, 90, and so forth? And when you look at the full picture, it's like a story. You look at the full picture of the employee experience, then is when you can say what is working and what's not working. Where do we need to change? What has been happening, right? That we can intervene in, because onboarding is not just at the beginning. I like to think of everboarding, right? And how do you extend that period of that honeymoon period? How do you extend that honeymoon period past the first 30 days? And then that's when you're going to see also your retention rates. If I see that Norman started September 1st, and by September 30th, he was like, I have to get out of here. What happened? Where did we fail? Was a disconnect in the onboarding? Did we not set the clear expectations? Or did we not make them feel welcomed? Or is the disconnect in the team and in the manager? So then you have to think, how can I best support that leader? How can I best support that manager to make them feel welcomed? It's not all just silos and like little pockets. It's a holistic experience that really takes us to that HR success. And then think about those diversity metrics. Think about what are our hiring trends. And that's a difficult conversation that we sometimes don't want to have, but you need to look at teams and say 80% of this team is from this specific demographic. So then that other 20% is not going to feel like it's super equitable. So, how are we being intentional in how we write job descriptions, how we welcome people into the company that makes them even want to apply to us? And how we grow so that we have an equitable and evenly distributed representation where everybody feels heard and seen, and not one specific group is monopolizing, right, the experience. And I think that's super, super important. And we often see it um, where we have one specific group that has the majority and they have the strong voice, and then we have a minority here. So being intentional in shifting that. And even if you don't have any control over hiring practices, what we do have control is over how we onboard them. What are we representing? So I can speak to my own experience where, and that's how I ended up being an ERG co-chair. I found my diverse voices in my employee resource groups through my onboarding. I was exposed to that, and I was exposed to a beautiful network of people that um, encouraged me to just be me and be authentically myself. And if I had not learned about that in my onboarding, if I had not been exposed to that, I would have never known that that's even an option that I have. So it's super, super important that if you are in the onboarding space, if you have any influence, even how you welcome someone into your teams, to take into consideration these three things, right? How are they trending in satisfaction? Are we keeping them? Are they excited to be here with us? Um, and then are we giving them that the representation in terms of opportunities to engage with diverse team members? So I know I'm like 5 minutes left for our wonderful 30-minute session. I'm going to open it up to some questions. Please feel free to ask anything. I'll do my best to answer. And like I said, I'll try to send this in the chat in a little bit if I'm able to. But if not, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect as well. Um, so, yeah, any questions, thoughts, concerns, complaints, all of the above? No, let's see. Thank you so much. We do. So, for example, thank you, Luis. That's a great question. Yes, We have multiple onboardings depending on the department and also on the location. So, for example, if we have people in India, based on the nuances that that specific location has, we create and the needs of that, we create a tailored onboarding experience for our India folks versus, for example, our Uruguay folks or our Canada folks. So it's really depending on the location and also on the department. So if someone's coming into marketing versus, let's say, engineering, we do tailor the onboarding experience because the measure of productivity is different, but what never changes is the need for DIMB in it. So we make sure that regardless of the department, that piece is always consistent, right? Exposing them to diverse talent within their organization or their department, giving them the opportunity to connect with people that are like-minded as well. That never changes. What changes is kind of the content based on the needs of that department. So great question. Another question that we have is how do you tailor DMB values with international communities? So one of the things that I know that have been proven successful, and I do this as well, is we do that cultural competency training. So we understand how we show up for each other and we don't bump heads with each other in that sense. So there's a really good tool called Globe Smart. If no one has ever heard of it, I highly, highly recommend it. And we train ourselves so that, for example, if I'm partnering with someone in Canada, I learn what business etiquette looks and feels like for them, what they receive better, and so then I can educate myself before I onboard them and welcome them into the company. And we also give them access so that they know what to expect. So they know, oh, you have a manager based out of Florida, but she's from Puerto Rico. This is kind of like what can you expect? And that helps build the relationship greatly. How long is your onboarding? Is 3 days? Is there a good number? It really depends, right? Like I said, onboarding is to me everboarding. Onboarding never really ends because we're all going to need support at some point in our career. I've done onboardings that are 4 day longs because it includes networking events, offsite activities to really hammer down the culture. And at the same time, I had other locations that needed something more concise and quick to get them productive quickly. So we narrowed it down to a day and a half, 2 days. So really, there is no specific number. It's what do you want to get out of the onboarding experience. If you're hammering down on productivity, usually less is more. If you're hammering down on culture and networking and that relationship, 3 days is really good. How would you recommend getting executive buy-in on the importance benefit? Yvonne, that is an amazing question, and I that goes back to our data. Data doesn't lie, and so when you go to your C-level executives and you say, "We hired 30 people in this month, and 15 of them already quit," or 15 of them are already expressing dissatisfaction scores, that's going to get their attention. So I am notorious, this is my personal recommendation. I am notorious for doing share outs on that trend. So from the onboarding side, we tend to just be like, we onboarded them, check, my job is done. But in reality, it's not. We need to track when did they start and when did we start seeing that trend down, and data speaks volumes. It creates a story. And then that's where we can say, hey, if we had done X, this would not be the result. If we had invested a little bit more time in culture and that experience, we wouldn't be having these trends where they're quitting, right? So, really hammering down on data is to me the key principle in terms of getting that buy-in, but also using the data to come up with a solution. That has been the chef's kiss for me in terms of getting that executive buy-in, because I'm not going to the table with a problem. I'm coming to the table with a trend and a solution to mitigate that trend. And when you speak in that way and you present it in that way, they listen. Of course, great questions. So, any other questions as we kind of bring it to a quick close. No? Okay. Well, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the confidence. This has been awesome. I'm trying to find the link. It's my first time using Ring Central to put the PDF. But again, find me on LinkedIn. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you, everybody.